Welcome to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Give us back our gold! One of the biggest themes of 2014, and no doubt 2015, as this long process of de-Fiatisation continues. Stacey?
Max, did you just make up that word?
Yeah, I just did, because I think you made it up because I read it on the teleprompter and you wrote it.
Well, this de-Fiatisation process is in the first headline. This is Dow Jones Market Watch, and they're asking with great alarm, Europeans want their gold back, and why that's bad for the euro. Right across Europe over the course of the last year, a series of European countries have been demanding that their gold reserves, which are often stored in different nations, are brought back home. On the surface, that seems very odd. After all, gold has no meaningful role in the financial system anymore, and after a 2-year bear market, it's not even worth as much as it was. It hardly seems worth the logistical or diplomatic hassle of bringing it back home.
Yeah, well, remember Jim Jones out there in Guyana. He convinced everyone to drink the cyanide-laced Kool-Aid, and they all died.
I survived.
Hale-Bopp Comet cult. Remember? They're going to get on the Hale-Bopp Comet and go meet somebody out there in outer space. So these policymakers and central bankers and central planners believe that fiat money has some intrinsic value, which of course it does not. And they want everyone to commit fiat suicide by embracing fiat paper nonsense over gold, except that a lot of people in Europe are now figuring out that this has been a huge con game, and when the music stops and only those with gold are going to survive, they want their gold back. So this is just propaganda from American propagandists, and it's typical.
It's also a generational thing. So since 1971, there's been no gold standard around the world. So people assume, well, everything's been seemingly okay, despite all the boom and bust and all the crashes and inflation and sort of turmoil in the markets. Everything seems to be okay, relative, and it's 40 years that we haven't died, nothing's, but they forget about the thousands of years of history where at the end of the day, as Alan Greenspan said, it's always gold in terms of a crisis is always accepted. And this is what he suggests could be happening in Europe in particular, because all these European nations want their gold back. And in particular, Netherlands, Germany, they've both started receiving gold. And now Austria has asked for its gold. It has 280 tons. 80% of it is here in London. So they want this back. And he's suggesting there are not many circumstances in which holding a big stash of gold on your own territory matters very much. But one of them is the sudden chaotic reorganization of your currency. If a country were to introduce a new currency overnight, that it could be backed by some gold right from the start that would give it some instant credibility in the markets. Repatriating gold only makes sense as a way of preparing for that to happen. So he says that he thinks these European nations think that the euro is going to fall apart. But I posit that China and Russia are also buying huge quantities of gold. Turkey, India, other places are buying gold. So I think it's the whole thing is falling apart.
Well, look what happened in Russia recently. The ruble made a move from 40 to the dollar to 80 to the dollar, and the gold price skyrocketed. So anybody holding gold in Russia, their experience with the ruble fluctuations was exactly zero. Their wealth did not budge one iota because they held gold. Gold acted exactly as you would in a currency crisis. Another thing is that, as you mentioned, we went up to gold standard in 1971. The world embarked for the first time in a fiat currency standard for the first time in history. And what has happened since then? Well, debt around the world has skyrocketed to 300% or more of GDP globally. Never happened before ever in history. And number two, the wealth and income gap is skyrocketing to extremes also never before seen in history. Also, the bond market has never been as overcooked in the UK as it has been now in over 300 years. In over 240 years in America, we've never seen bonds as highly priced as they are now. All these things happen because of abandonment to the gold standard. And now, as this whole thing is becoming a big flaming ball of nonsense, and a meteor of fiat currency is about to impact planet Earth, of course, people are buying for gold once again. And the sad part is when you go out there to buy the gold, in the panic, there will be none for sale.
Exactly. And that's what Sandeep Jaitley, but Professor Fiatisation in particular, has said on the Keiser Report many times over the past year or two, is that people won't comprehend it. This guy is struggling to understand it, but one day there will be no price. You won't be able to buy it for $1 trillion Zimbabwe dollars or $1 trillion US dollars or $1 trillion rubles. There will be no fiat price for it because nobody will want to exchange it. Right now, you can, they're paying you fiat actually to lend them your gold. You're making a lot of free money and you get your gold back. So we'll talk about that with Sandeep Jaitley in the second half. But on top of this, this is another big trend, and it's a multi-year, could be multi-decade trend, as when the British empire collapse. It took 20, 30, 40 years. I think we're also seeing the same thing with the U.S. because remember, China passed in purchasing power parity, our GDP in the U.S. So we see that in this next headline. You mentioned the ruble crisis. Well, in step China. China offers Russia help with currency swap suggestion. China will provide help if needed and is confident Russia can overcome its economic difficulties. Foreign Minister Wang Yi was cited as saying in Bangkok in a December 20th report by Hong Kong-based Phoenix TV. Commerce Minister Gao Hucheng said expanding a currency swap between the two nations and making increased use of yuan for bilateral trade would have the greatest impact in aiding Russia, according to the broadcaster. But according to the experts and analysts interviewed in this, it also allows for the yuan to become a world reserve currency as well.
What did Horace Greeley say? Go east, young man. No, that's a revision. That's the new version. That's the Horace Greeley 2.0. Yeah, of course, China, Russia, they're doing currency swaps. They are aggressively buying gold. They're waiting for that moment in history when the dollar finally gives up the ghost, and we've got a new global currency standard that's probably backed in part by gold.
And at the end of the year, China said that they wanted to, the president of China said that they wanted to adopt a big country diplomacy. So they're getting ready to take their place on the world stage. This is, again, like a very long process. It's been happening for the last 10, 15, 20 years, and it will take another 10, 20 years for there to be a truly at least bipolar world, but maybe a multipolar world. And China is promoting the yuan as an alternative to the dollar for global trade and finance. And the PBOC, the People's Bank of China, has signed currency swap agreements with 28 other central banks to encourage this. The nation's foreign exchange reserves of 3.89 trillion are the world's largest and compare with Russia's 374 billion. So they already entered in a currency swap with Argentina. Remember, they helped save the Argentinian peso, and now they stepped in with a currency swap back in October for 150 billion yuan, which is about $24 billion with a currency swap with Russia.
Well, the U.S. is just not standing by and letting this go without some kind of response. I mean, George Clooney and Jim Carrey are going to war with North Korea to defend the interests of Sony. So, this is what America will hopefully survive in the 21st century if people can download and pay huge tariffs to Hollywood cartel, copyright cartel. As long as that's preserved, then America should be fine.
And also this article mentions that China and Russia is an irreplaceable partner. Russia is an irreplaceable strategic partner on the international stage, according to an editorial in the Global Times, a Beijing-based daily affiliated with the Communist Party. China must take a proactive attitude in helping Russia walk out of the current crisis. So again, this is another important thing is as an empire is rising, they're very nice. They want to make good. They want to globalize the world, not deglobalize the world. That's another trend we saw in 2014 was the deglobalization happening rapidly via the U.S., just like the British Empire. When they were falling, they deglobalized the world because they weren't the winners anymore. They didn't like the setup anymore when they were no longer the winners. So we're going to go through another few years, I think, of this turmoil.
It's like the Muhammad Ali-George Foreman fight when he had knocked him out, basically, and he could have put in another punch there, but he let him just step back and let him fall in that spectacular crash.
Yeah.
Or, as maybe as Putin would say, why should we be chasing the piglets when we could be eating honey and berries? I mean, I think those are words that will resonate throughout 2015.
Yes, and also, the U.S. dollar is obviously the world's reserve currency, but it's been shrinking as in terms of percentage of trade. It's down now to like 60% when it was up at 80% only a decade ago. But it's become just a pure poker chip now. It's no better than going into any casino and in Vegas or in Macau, and now it's a genuine just a currency of gambling because surging U.S. dollar threatens emerging markets carry trades. Now, this was from September, and of course, it got worse from there into the end of the year as a carry trade, the dollar carry trade unwinded. There were between 2 and 7 trillion, depending on who you read, of carry trades based on the borrowing in the dollar for 0% and lending in emerging markets for higher percent. Maybe it was only 4 or 5% at the height of the insanity of the QE-driven 0% interest rate yield chasing. So Here we see that several analysts sense danger in the air. The carry trade strategies are finally cracking, said Luis Costa, currency strategist at Citibank. The market has been so flooded with liquidity and interest rates have been so low for so long, but this is turning now, just at the same time that China passed in the purchasing power parity, the U.S. economy.
Currency carry trades, we usually associate them with the yen carry trade, the Swiss franc carry trade, where you're getting an interest rate pickup by borrowing in yen or Swiss franc. But when you talk about the U.S. dollar as involved in carry trades, we're talking about the quadrillion big derivatives market around the world. All derivatives are priced essentially in dollars. You know, commodities like gold and oil are priced in dollars. So when we talk about the carry trade in dollars, we're talking about the global derivatives market, of which is now worth over $1 quadrillion in dollars. And as the deflationary forces continue to spiral downward and suck the balance sheets of the central banks and various other banks into the abyss, there's actually a shortage of dollars. There's a need to print lots of more bonds. I mean, bond prices typically can go up because there's a huge demand to settle out on these derivative trades that are now going bust. So, but the dollar improving, going higher in 2015, it does set up really an enormous conflict around the world because you're going to have a scramble for resources. Agriculture, energy, space, water, all resources are going to be, there's going to be a huge scramble. So we're setting the stage now for a global conflict. And we see it as a precursor to that in the currency Forex trading every single day now. And newcomer Russian ruble, which has never been in the Forex market before, is now getting a foothold in there. In 2015, we'll see that come on.
Well, this carry trade thing, it can destroy economies. You remember Iceland when that collapsed? That was due to the unwinding of a carry trade. Yes, there was a lot of banking fraud, but this was the unwinding of a carry trade. So Malaysia, for example, 45% of all their debt is held by these carry traders. Poland, Hungary, and Mexico, also 35% of all their debt is held by these people speculating with the carry trade. So the currency risk, what happens? The currency goes up, people start to lose money, they unwind the trade, chaos ensues.
And Iceland's a good example of what can happen when things fall apart. And so this is basically 2015 looks like when really all this kind of unwinds. All right, so Stacey, you've got to go. Thanks.
Woohoo! Defiatisation.
Well, I see this isn't your first time to the Forex rodeo. Well, stay tuned for the second half, a whole lot more. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Sandeep Jaitley of Fiatisation.com. Sandeep, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Thanks, Max.
All right, let's first talk about a topic you have introduced to the audience, and I think we need to follow up on it, GoFo. So GoFo, a big story of 2014. Remind the audience what GoFo is, why it's unusual at the moment. Continue.
Sure.
Yes.
So GoFo is the gold, it stands for the gold offered forward rate. And it's basically, it's the amount, it's the rate at which you can borrow dollars, giving gold as collateral on the other side of that loan. So if it's 0.5%, it basically means for whatever maturity you're talking about, you can borrow dollars for 0.5% less than you could if you weren't using gold as collateral. So that's what GoFo means. It's like a gold LIBOR. So when GoFo goes negative, it basically means that if you've got gold to give as collateral, you can get a dollar loan on a negative basis. So if you're borrowing $1 million, you only need to return back $1 million less this amount.
So why usually it means if it's negative, it means the demand for physical is quite high.
Well, yes, because obviously there are two sides to a trade. So the other side of that trade is they must need your gold.
Right.
And
so
we have to
there's huge demand for gold, physical gold.
Yeah, we should stop talking about it in terms of physical gold, and we should just say gold and not gold. You know, gold in the hand is all that there is. You know, there is no...
Right, but we make the distinction because in the paper gold market, like the COMEX, people dump paper gold and keeps the price at a level that doesn't seem to represent the true demand as represented by this GoFo rate, which is that it's gone negative. The demand is so high, people are willing to take a loss on the gold just to get their hands on the gold.
It's not a loss on the gold, Max, because you get your gold back at the end of the period. So the question is, why are they giving free fiat for your gold? Will you get your gold back at the end of the period, is the question that more and more people will ask themselves in this realm of the
No, and kind of a strange corollary to this, not to totally bamboozle the mind of the listener out there, but in Europe now we're seeing more and more negative interest rates.
Yes.
Okay, so it's kind of there's a connection here.
Yes.
Which at the risk of diving headlong into an enormous pool of futures contracts, technical speak, let's talk about negative interest rates for a second in Europe. In other words, when you put your money in the bank, they don't give you nothing. As a matter of fact, they take it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, they want you to spend it. They want you to spend it. They're fed up with them monetizing these fiat bonds, quantitative easing. So they're swapping all of these demand deposits for treasury bonds in the market, and we're not there doing anything with it. I say we, it's obviously a different set of people, but they're not there doing anything with it. So what better way to make them do something with that than by cutting it, basically, and saying if you don't spend it, we'll cut it.
Right. So the zero bound on interest rates is viewed as the absolute lowest you can go. And this is what governments have pursued to try to stimulate the economies by making interest rates zero interest rate policy, or ZIRP. But they don't get any inflation. They're not getting any inflation. There's still huge deflation. In other words, the balance sheets of these banks are still crumbling. So, but the zero is not the ultimate place you can go. You can go negative. You can go to negative interest rates, where they charge you to hold your money with the idea that they don't want you to keep your money in the bank. They want you to go out there and circulate the money.
Yes.
Stop saving. Stop being sovereign. Stop being an individual. Stop being freedom-loving sovereign types. Go out and spend everything. Go into debt.
They want you to, I mean, it's their money to begin with, so they can tell you...
In other words, when you put money in the bank, they own the money. It's not your money anymore.
Well, it never was. Fiat money is never, it's not your money. It's their money always. Don't forget that.
All right, so interest rates tell an interesting tale. So in the case of the banks, they're going to negative interest rates. In the case of GOFO rates, just take another pass at this. In other words, the rate on the in this contract is such where you don't lose gold, as you point out.
No.
But
So say you have 100 ounces of gold, and you're tempted by this offer. So you give your 100-ounce bar to your banker, your bullion banker, and he gives you a loan for, let's say, however many, let's say, $120,000, of which you only need to return $119,000. And at the end of that period, you get your 100-ounce bar of gold back.
right, so
you've got $1,000 free.
Right, you got $1,000 free.
Yeah.
But this is unusual. Free money.
It shouldn't happen.
Right, it's free money.
It shouldn't happen if you believe that fiat is money, which of course no sane person does believe that fiat is money.
Right, this is free money, which in a system where people are trading at billions of times a second, and all arbitrage spreads are eliminated. And yet, this is a huge arbitrage spread.
Huge, it's massive. That's why they're not publishing GOFO from the end of January, because you have to call up your banker and find out what the rate is directly from them, because...
Either this is a price signal is wrong, or the market's screwed up.
Or both, I mean...
But the price signal is not wrong in that it is the signal, but
well, it's very easy, as you said, Max, to manipulate the price. It's very hard to manipulate GOFO to become positive again, because there are all of these obligations denominated in gold terms. The Central Bank of Brazil has just realized that the way that it owns its gold is not commensurate with actually getting gold, which was similar to the Bank of Portugal when Central Bank of Portugal, when Lehman's went under.
Okay, let's talk about countries for a second, because on the sovereign scale, Netherlands is repatriating 122 tons of gold from the New York Fed. Austria, perhaps next up. So, as you point out, the market's screwed up. And it's obviously in the GOFO rates, where you get free money, essentially. So countries are looking at this and saying, wait a minute, we're not stupid. this looks like the fiat money is about to collapse. We want our physical gold back.
Yeah.
And this is a huge trend right now, right?
It seems like you can't have your gold back and the fiat money system surviving. So this is going to be a very interesting evolution, all of this central bank.
And, of course, you have big players like China, Russia have been buying gold very aggressively. There's a rumor out there during the ruble, when it was down recently, that Russia was selling their gold. That was quickly disproved. In fact, they're buying more gold, correct?
Yes, I would imagine so. I don't have any greater knowledge.
All right, now, a few years ago, you told us here on Keiser Report that central banks would take us back to the Stone Age with experiments in quantitative easing. Okay, here we are at the end of 2014. It looks like they're winning. You know, equity and property prices are up. Commodities are down. Where are we in the story?
We aren't over in that in the story yet, Max. I mean, you know, they say that they're finishing QE. That's a load of. It's not strictly true, you know, because whatever is on the balance sheet of the Fed currently is going to mature within X months. So within X months, they'll need to buy another lot of treasury bonds on the open market.
When you talked about this a year ago or so, did you, in your calculations, count on banks being able to get away with going to negative interest rates, as they are doing? Or was that at the time you were thinking, well, they would probably not, they would never get away with doing that?
I always thought the Swiss would try something like that, because they think like that.
But now it's moving to all over Europe.
It's moving, the mentality is moving, everywhere.
Okay, so your thesis basically, the reason it's taking perhaps longer is because of this negative interest rate environment, which is really just making the problem worse. So that when it does, when the proverbial
they will
hits
start
the fan.
spending it. There's no question. You know, I mean, the German mindset is obviously to save the banknotes. You know, that rather than spend them. But it won't. I don't know what it will take, but they will start spending them very quickly.
Here in the UK, the UK gilt market, the sovereign, the government bond market, it's at a 350-year high.
Yeah.
So prices for bonds haven't been this high for 350 years, since the beginning, really, of the Bank of England. Yields are at a 350-year low, obviously. So the national debt keeps rising. So what happens if rates, at some point, they just, you know, every season has a cycle. I mean, things go around. I mean, our interest rates cannot just go negative and down for eternity.
It won't. It will all cancel itself somehow, you know. And the question is, I don't know how it will cancel itself. But just like it was created out of nowhere, that's where it will go back to. You know, these debts aren't real debts. You know, this money isn't real money. Just how it cancels itself is the interesting game going forward.
Now, your mentor, I think, is safe to say, Professor Fiatisation, who, you know, he's been on the show a few times, and I must say he's a bit of a chick magnet. You know, the women love this guy. I don't know what it is. He's got that spark, that Hollywood pizzazz. He's like the George Clooney of monitors. So he was saying, you know, buy bonds. It's a guaranteed way to make money because, you know, he never really, you know, we were shaking him like, Professor, what are you saying? It's crazy. But yet he's been right now for years. Because
the only problem with that, Max, is that if you want to pursue...
questioning the professor? What?
I had to question him. You have to be out of your gold and your silver and in bonds to make that trade. And when you want to get back into your gold and silver from all of your fantastic bond fiat trading rubbish profits, you won't be able to. So that's the dichotomy, you know, that you have playing the fiat game. Is that, yeah, of course, you can make a fortune from this capital appreciation and gilts and all of this rubbish. But it's all in fiat terms. It doesn't mean anything. And when you want to exchange it for something that matters to you on a subjective basis, then it will all be exposed for what it is, which is a charade.
That Fiatisation knew best all along. That's what we're talking about. Now, let's, we got about a minute left. You know, recently there's been a lot of action in the currency pits, you know, trading pits, particularly in the ruble. Because the ruble is only not even 1% of global Forex. And they just really cut it loose recently to let it trade freely on the Forex exchange. And it got, you know, it was a baptism by fire. It got, like, hammered. And then they figured out, oh, my God, you know, how do we play this game? And now it's already come back substantially because they're figuring out exactly how to play the Forex war as it is. But a quick question is, if you were a central banker in Russia and you really wanted to stick it to the pound and the dollar, wouldn't you collapse the COMEX in New York by taking physical delivery of gold and thus setting in motion a huge price spike in gold and destroying fiat?
Well,
dollar?
if I were of, let's say, a villainous inclination, you know, I think COMEX have rules against one individual doing that kind of thing. Now, groups of individuals is another matter, you know, and but of course, demanding contractual delivery for things like that is something that anyone who has a COMEX contract can, but then they can settle in fiat. Is there?
Yeah, they can settle in fiat, but anyway, it's an interesting theory.
There are other ways beyond that.
Okay, well, we'll explore those next time here. Sandeep, thanks for being on the Keiser Report.
Thanks, Max.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Sandeep Jaitley. If you'd like to get in touch, tweet us at Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.